Hello, and welcome to this DC Velocity webcast, 5 ways to evolve your omnichannel, distribution, and logistics operations. I'm Ben Ames, Senior News Editor at DC Velocity. Thanks for joining us. E-commerce has revolutionized the way that consumers shop by bringing the full power of the supply chain directly to their doorsteps. But in the past 18 months, retailers have identified new challenges in driving omnichannel business and in responding to customers' needs, thanks to supply chain disruptions, changes in consumer demand, and inventory visibility and positioning hurdles. Altogether, that means supply chain leaders in every sector are searching for ways to deconstruct their omnichannel business challenges. In this webinar, experts from Spinnaker SCA will share 5 proven methods for evolving your omnichannel distribution and logistics operations. They will describe key omnichannel trends, lessons learned, real-world strategies, and case studies. We have just a few announcements before we begin. First, here are some tips to help you connect and participate in the webcast. This webcast is designed to be interactive between you and our presenters. Later on in the program, we'll have a question and answer session to allow you to ask our presenters questions relevant to the topics discussed today. And as well, in the middle, we'll even have a poll question to fine-tune the content to exactly who's in the room with us. You can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during the webcast. You don't have to wait until the very end. Just type your question into the text box located at the bottom left of the console and click that Submit Question button. We'll get to as many questions during our presentation as we can. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. If slides are not advancing, please go ahead and press the F5 key or try Control-R on your keyboard to refresh your console. We also recommend that you disable your pop-up blockers. And finally, if you're experiencing any technical problems, please visit our webcast help guide by clicking on the help link below the media player. Now, let's get on with our program. Allow me to introduce today's presenters. We have George Fowler and we have Michael Murrison. George is Senior Vice President of Planning and Omnichannel and the Chief Technology Officer at Spinnaker SCA. And Michael is Spinnaker's Vice President of Distribution and Logistics. Welcome, gentlemen. I will now turn the stage over to George, who will begin today's presentation. George?
Well, thank you, Ben. Just a little word about Spinnaker. We're a company that's been in the supply chain industry, helping companies like yours to implement solutions and do management and business consulting for the better part of the last 2 decades. You know, it's interesting that you started off, Ben, by talking about the impact of the last of the global pandemic, because quite frankly, that has been a game changer in terms of what's happened in the marketplace. And so today, we thought we'd talk about those game-changing effects. What's the challenges that Omnichannel has presented to our customers that we're working with? We're going to talk a little bit about the economic drivers to actually prove that out and give credibility to the claim that fundamentally the game has changed, and companies that are doing retail, whether you are in both the manufacturing or the retail space, have really had to up their game in order to keep pace with their competitors and to keep pace with the demands of a ever-growing customer base. We're then going to get into the evolution of those capabilities. So we'll talk a little bit about what are the capabilities that people have come to expect and what's new and improved about them. And then we'll really get into the nuts and bolts of this presentation, how to adapt your organization, what's the roadmap to getting there to be capable within your specific industry to respond to those customer needs. And then we'll talk about those in a little bit more depth as we go through it. So without further ado, as you so correctly put it, the game has fundamentally changed because of the pandemic. It's not that we weren't going to get here in terms of the demands that the customers placed on e-commerce. The simple fact is that it's accelerated in many ways. If you think about it, just 2 years ago, most of us did most of our shopping at the mall. When we wanted to get something that we needed, we'd go in one store and take one item out of that store and purchase it, and then go to the next store. And using our tactile approaches and feel, we would find the outfit or the components or accessories that matched that particular product that we were buying. Let's say we were shopping for an event. Today, Omnichannel, because of the pandemic, really, people were not able to go into the mall, not get that tactile experience, not get that personalized person who's going to come work with them and help them to understand what's in style and what's not, and so on. And so because of that, it's really changed the way people are fundamentally shopped. And now they expect those same dimensions from an e-commerce online perspective. And so that has forever changed how we shop online and how we, that experience that we're expecting from a consumer perspective and how we interact. More importantly, that has thrown the supply chain industry on its heels. Quite frankly, we've spent the last 20 years explaining to companies how to take planning and design and the interplay between those two and continuous planning to get better results, to manage their costs, manage their resilience, and so on. But the new options that are being presented to the customer because of the pandemic have accelerated the need to do more horizontal planning across not just your group of vendors and retailers and so on, but now to be able to do that in the context of a horizontal plan that allows you to have marketplaces that allow the shopper to shop for more than one thing or have personalized shopping capabilities at the same time. Again, the impact on the overall supply chain has just been profound. As proof of that, I just want to talk about a couple of macroeconomic drivers. If you kind of look at the early days of the internet and e-commerce, you can see there was a steady growth, but it's been in the last 2 years, 2018, 2019, and 2020, that you've seen that exponential growth. The real demand for not just online shopping where you had a catalog that you could search from, but the experiential shopping where people know your preferences, they understand your buying behaviors, they understand that when you are purchasing something, you want the next accessory that goes with it. And again, weaving together that tactile approach has been a fundamental capability that has been required as we move forward. Michael has been, as part of his work, has been really looking at the impact of the pandemic on the shopping behavior. And so I'm going to kind of introduce him to tell you a little bit more about that.
Thanks, George. Good afternoon, everyone. As George and I were preparing for this presentation, we were hard-pressed, obviously, not to address the last 18 months. You can see what it's done to a trend line that already existed. We all know that. Things were trending digital. This has exacerbated that. And sort of rule of thumb on our end is by about 5 years. So those that were sort of in a good place and understood where they were on their roadmap from an e-commerce perspective, this trend has exacerbated over the last 18 months and jumped the percentage of retail sales on a path that is north of 20%. And so what we're looking at is obviously what is driving that? What's the adoption that is driving that? And largely, many of those habits were formed in new sectors of the marketplace. Folks that maybe didn't try to get their groceries delivered to them. They enjoyed going to the store every couple of days. They didn't have that option in a lot of cases. And so what we've all experienced, if it's not ourselves who have changed our behavior, it's maybe a parent or grandparent who has changed their behavior. That adoption is driving this increase, certainly, but also the availability of the capability. And a lot of retailers and others coming to the table and meeting consumers where they want to be or have to be, as was the case over the last year or so. And so we can see things, different categories like medication and groceries and even cars can now be engaged with in an omni-channel way and meeting consumers where and how they want to shop. There was a little bit of a grace period there with retailers and consumers understanding that service and different kinds of things would have been disrupted. But we can see even as restrictions have lifted, the adoption remains. These habits are here to stay. And as we kind of look at this, just again from just a perspective of supply chain and how it needs to reshape to meet those customer expectations that George laid out, that is what's driving the supply chain of the future, and certainly within an omni-channel context. And so we're changing the way supply chains are designed and functioning, and certainly trend lines existed, but they are moving dramatically in a digital way. The good news is that omni-channel and the ability to adapt and meet customer expectations is good for business. We can see that companies that adopt an omni-channel strategy have increased revenue year over year. We can see the majority of customers now expect basic omni-channel capabilities like buy online, ship to store. It's a very competitive marketplace, and meeting consumers where they want to be is critical. This is not slowing down. And I think that what we can see here, based on studies that have been done sort of post-pandemic or wherever you want to call it, where we are, consumers expect 2 to 3 days as the baseline from a delivery perspective. And increasingly so, we see consumers expecting same-day delivery. And what does that mean to the supply chain? How does it change the way we work inside our distribution centers? How does it change the way we plan inventory and orchestrate fulfillment of that inventory against a demand? So we see companies responding, and the expectation of same-day delivery and other increased service level, product availability, et cetera, is now the standard. And so companies are investing in that, and a lot of that has to do with the supply chain and the fulfillment capabilities that we're going to talk to here in more detail.
All right. So, it's interesting, as Michael has said, the changes in buyer behavior set the stage for the new level of integrated capabilities across the supply chain. For the better part of the last 10 years, we've been talking about the Convergence Model. And this is a model that basically says when you integrate your strategy and design with planning, it has to be more real-time, more to do things like yield optimization or make versus buy calculations within your supply chain. All of those things will help you to figure out how to segment your products, how to get better response from the high priority products that you need to get out to your customers at the right time, in the right place. Similarly, the execution of being able to digitally know where any product is from its WIP stage all the way to finished goods and out the door to the end customer was critical in a vertical sense. But now we need to think more horizontally about how networks will talk to other networks, how vendors with homogeneous products that are selling across a spectrum of capabilities and products that their end customers want, are able to model those together, how they're able to share that data in the background to be able to do fundamental tasks that they used to do before, like forecasting and inventory placement and so on. Those key elements now are no longer siloed within your organization. They are now going to be integrated across different companies that have to share different information before. And again, this is not just a retail phenomenon. This is now happening in manufacturing. The fact that customers now want custom manufacturers. Think about how many times you've gone to the mall and you've gone and bought a hat and then had them customize your name on it right there. This now has to happen between the manufacturers making that hat and maybe a co-seller that's actually customizing those before they reach your house. And as as Michael alluded to, that has to happen in 3 to 4 days. So being able to get visibility to all of this at any given time, and the global visibility that it takes to make sure that you've got those components in a very constrained marketplace is vitally important. I thought it might be a good idea to give you just an idea of what, a scenario looks like today. And this is pretty common and one that we see happening quite a bit. Again, gone are the days of the Amazon catalog or the eBay catalog where you just see one thing that you're going out to get and you buy that one thing and then you go to another site to buy something else. It's interesting. I have a neighbor who's the most interesting person in terms of how he dresses and how he goes out to events. When he goes to a football game, he's got to be dressed to the nines with whatever he's going to be wearing there. And the way he interacts within his e-commerce strategy is exemplified by the fact that he can go to a single marketplace, buy the hat that he planned to wear to the game, but while he's on that marketplace picking out that hat, there's a login or an extension of that page or that shopping experience that allows him to customize a jersey with his name, with the number he wants. It has the same color palette as the hat that he just chose. And then lo and behold, another link comes up and gives him the option of personalizing a pair of tennis shoes that match, where he can make the colors any way he wants, or he can set those on the shoes any way he wants. And the real nice part about the experience is it's a single experience with a single cart, with a single available to promise to him that he'll have it before his game. He'll be able to do track and trace through it, and it has the assortment of styles that he wants at that particular time, which means that there is going to have to be a plethora of activities happening on the back half of the supply chain where, for instance, and you'll notice the litany of questions that these particular vendors and manufacturers will have to answer, from the manufacturer who's making the shoes of, do I have that style in place and can I manufacture it in a 2-week period and can, with a sufficient lead time to ship it out? Can the distributor of the jersey, get it printed by a co-packer and shipped out? How are they going to centralize that order and manage the shipment? Is it going to go out as a single order? Is it going to go out as a series of boxes that show up to your house? And then what's the cost to serve model for that? We still have drivers within our supply chain that force us to try to minimize the cost. And in fact, the more savvy shoppers that are out there today are looking at things like your carbon impact, your cost of shipping, and so on. And they're making their decisions on whether to buy these based upon the impact that you are making on the environment overall. So it's important to understand that all of these capabilities together really are fundamentally the building blocks that are required to be able to allow that consumer experience to continue moving forward. In our next couple of slides, Michael is going to take us through the fundamental aspects, both from a consumer perspective and from a supply chain perspective, of capabilities that are needed to support this type of e-commerce.
Yeah, so George, it's a good example. Timely, fall is here, football season, and so how do we get your neighbor game day ready? And I think the customer experience that you just laid out, obviously, is one that you can apply to your daily life, and we can certainly understand how that digital experience is really driving retail today, and certainly other verticals as well. We look at these things from a practitioner's perspective. That's who we are, and that's what we do for a living. So, we look at enabling these capabilities across a series of key functions across the entire order life cycle. So if we look at this slide kind of as the menu, if you will, of capabilities required to execute on these key use cases, based on the order life cycle, certain functions are required to deliver those capabilities. Everything from knowing what's available, making sure the product is available to buy, making sure you're able to capture the order against that available inventory, convert that cart into an actual demand signal, think about payment types and promised delivery dates that are shared, things that the supply chain can do to help with conversion, routing orders from after capture to an appropriate node for fulfillment. So whether that be a store, a distribution center, or perhaps even a third-party vendor within your ecosystem. The customer service that wraps that. Hey, I called and I need to add on something for my wife, for my kids, right? Because they have to be game day ready also. Having the ability to modify orders through a call center. And then being prepared for the inevitable, roughly 30% or so of returns that come back from an e-commerce perspective, and treating that reverse supply chain like a forward one, because it very much is part of the customer's experience. What's behind that? So we talked a little bit about the key functions that are required to execute on those capabilities and those use cases. Now let's talk about the platform. And I think really for this slide, the key here is that it is indeed an orchestrated platform. This is not a single point solution. You can see everything from the front end, your e-commerce marketplace, whatever that front end looks like for your organization, the merchandising and planning that goes into making that product available, third-party sites that you're using for payment and fraud and other functions to execute, order management, the orchestration that we just talked about, and the functionality that's required to get that demand signal into the fulfillment space. And then from a logistics perspective, actually executing on that service level that we talked about being so important these days. Certainly from a store side, let's say it's buy online, pick up in store, we have to have associates prepared and the store itself prepared to execute on that, shipping to home or perhaps picking up directly at the store. So there's a lot there. And one of the things we want to stress here, and certainly we understand our audience here is probably at different points in their journey. Some have started and are quite far along. Others maybe not, right? Maybe we're trying to get more information about how we start and where to start. What we've done here is we've put together just kind of a high-level maturity look at Omnichannel and how we would sort of classify things. This is helpful for us as we kind of go in and we start to look at an environment and say, okay, well, what's our baseline? So level one is a limited capability. So largely, this is siloed. We're not offering much convergence between digital and physical channels. Level two is inconsistent. Maybe you've initiated the roadmap, perhaps implementing some of that platform technology we just talked about. That's a requirement and a prerequisite for enabling the capabilities. Inconsistent. We just mentioned competing is Omnichannel is really taken hold inside the organization. From a marketing and merchandising perspective, distribution centers and stores, we have capabilities that are enabled, buy online, pick up in store, perhaps even endless aisle or save a sale technology inside the stores to view product availability and other sources. If you're leading, you've been doing this a while, and you know the benefits of Omnichannel. That's very much permeated throughout your organization, and you can see the adoption of really optimization of those capabilities. How am I evolving what I've already provided to the consumer, but now I'm optimizing the execution of that. I'm using AI and predictive analytics to be better at service, right? To make sure that the right products are at the right place at the right time, to make sure we are executing at a very high level in terms of order accuracy and fulfillment SLA. And so when we look at this scale of level 1 to level 4, what's helpful for us, and we're actually going to open up a poll question here, is to get your feedback. So here is where you can engage with us and you can help us understand based on what we just talked through, are, level 1 with limited capability, pretty siloed. Level 2, inconsistent. We're starting to see that roadmap form and maybe making some initial investments. Level 3 is competing. We've implemented several of them. Now we still have work to do. Level 4 is leading. We feel like we're leading within our space against our peers, and we're continuing to invest in more advanced technology to evolve our omnichannel strategy. So if you guys could give us your feedback, it'll help us tailor content here as we proceed and see where everybody is.
As we wait for everyone to kind of make their choices and help us move forward, one of the things I was thinking about, Michael, is the fact that how new technologies and digital transformation is actually impacting the general behaviors that we used to see from shoppers in the past. Like, as an example, my wife is one of those people who like to buy 5 or 6 different things and then go try them on and see what works and then sends it back. That's a reverse, a reverse planning nightmare from what you were talking about before. Not only is there a cost associated with returning those products, but that's a lost sales opportunity when you don't have that color, size, style on the shelf or in your e-commerce site. I've seen a lot of work done and by your team and by the rest of our organization around using AI as a driver for helping people predictably be able to find that right style that works for them, and then utilize that to cut down on the amount of orders that they take in. What other things have you seen that you think might, kind of lend themselves in this area?
Yeah, so let's flip over here, George, and see our responses here. It looks like, based on this, pretty much everybody's started. So that's a good thing. I think largely that matches the marketplace. And we think here, seems like the majority of folks feel like they're still inconsistent, right? In that we've maybe started some of those investments. Maybe we've got a global inventory view. Maybe that view is still developing. Some of the maybe early adopted sort of customer expected functions are there, buy online, pick up in store, and doing some basic things from an omnichannel perspective. And then we've got some others who are a little bit further along and probably understand a lot about the evolution, the technology that you just mentioned, George, and what that can do, integrating consumer data, things that you would expect from a CRM perspective into how we treat that customer within our brand and our ecosystem. So that's helpful, guys. I think, for here, George, the question is what do we do, right? How do we actually go and action on what's in front of us?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think it's one we have an answer for. So from our perspective, there are 5 fundamental areas that we need to focus on. The first one is the enhanced convergence of design, planning, and execution capabilities. Again, if you're just starting your digital transformation strategy, it's incumbent upon you to really start to integrate those solutions under, the APS solutions in the background that really help you to do that decisioning faster, and then effectively take into account different changes and collaboration requirements that occur within the marketplace. Secondly, I think global inventory visibility, it is critical in these days with the capacity problems that we're having today, that we have full visibility to our inventory no matter where it is, because quite frankly, the allocation strategies that we're going to be using to make sure that we can get that product to the customer and then don't double count it on the back end from a forecasting perspective is critical. So as part of that, we also need to know, the ability to do real-time available to promise for the end customer, whether we're capable to promise it as part of a large order or individual order where we're going to have to do break packs later on. A customer-focused e-commerce strategy, as we just suggested with just a couple of these different strategies, whether you're in apparel or you're in drug and pharmaceuticals, or you're in alcohol distribution. Now that laws have changed and opened the door to increase e-commerce across different industries, it's time to have a concerted effort, put together a concerted effort to take that on and have a team invested within your organization that's invested in trying to find new ways to extend your brand in your sales. Flexible fulfillment, being able to do that break pack, to be able to do shipping, consolidated shipping with other vendors and so on is important. And then last mile visibility, making sure that the customer service that you gave them in the store is still that white glove service that you give them at the door. Dropping a beat up package on the doorstep while it's been accepted for many years is probably not the way that you want to present your brand moving forward. And there are opportunities to change that last mile experience to get more customers and to increase your customer retention. And then using the response from those customers as predictive indicators of how they're going to move forward in the future. Again, that's the experience that you're going to have from an online perspective. But if you kind of take a look at what needs to happen from a back end perspective, there are a number of elements that need to occur. Again, the integration of strategy and design with planning and execution is critical. Again, you've got to make sure that you're doing all of these things in a cost-effective way. Or if you make a decision that you're not going to do it, you're doing it to gain market share. You also, just to highlight another point here, you should be looking at your environmental impact, your social impact, making sure that you understand the buyer's needs and so on. And then, of course, there's the regulatory impact. As regulations open up, you need to be able to adapt to those. And then there's, I call it the Uberization of planning. Now, the integration with other business models that exist out there that can help get your products out to your consumers faster. There is no substitute for planning in supply chain to manage costs and being able to provide tactical support for product distribution. And again, I'm going to emphasize this again, the network of networks, making sure that your network is tied in collaboratively with you, both upstream and downstream with your vendors, your raw material providers, and your distributors and retailers. But more importantly than ever, being able to do that horizontally across companies that have complementary services and capabilities. And again, it's not just limited to products. Sometimes it is services that you'll be providing complementary interactions with, and they should be able to do that in one place. And then from an execution perspective, I won't steal Michael's thunder. He's the expert here. But as we go through and kind of rehashing, going into some of the use cases, we'll talk about some of the execution areas where we've been helping companies to improve in those areas.
Yeah, so George, appreciate that. I think for this slide, what's really important is the recognition that this is very much a personalized journey for everyone, and even folks who are in sort of similar areas, peers. The roadmap to success in this space it can be very different. What just to orient you a little bit here, what we're looking at are 4 of our clients, different spaces: health and beauty, jewelry, home decor, and apparel and accessories. And so if we take that same maturity scale, this gives you a quick look of, hey, how far along would we consider that they are? A couple of them leading, some competing, one inconsistent. And so how have they gotten there? So if you look at the chevrons kind of from left to right, that's the sequence of enablement of certain capabilities that you would have seen on that menu we talked about earlier. So how do I start? And what's really, really important is that you start. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Sounds like everybody who participated in the survey has started, so that's a good thing, perhaps with some of these same things. So, for example, our retailer number 4, one of their big drivers and why they started with buying online and then shipping from the DC to store, what we call BOSS, they wanted to offer a free shipping option to their customers. It was very important to their customers, and they wanted to drive traffic into the stores. And so they had a multi-channel distribution node. They were servicing retail and e-commerce fulfillment out of that same distribution center. And so the program was developed off of that capability, the ability to take an e-com order, fulfill it out of the same distribution center that the retail orders were being fulfilled out of, and riding them together. So it was a consolidation of shipping on the client side. And for the buyer, she ended up in the store picking up her order. And she oftentimes would pick up something else while she was there. And so for them, what's really, really important, again, was getting started. You can see that they've gone on to enable endless aisle, complete visibility across their supply chain and stores. They can buy online, return in the stores. They can ship from the stores in specific scenarios. And now they're starting to do predictive analytics and deciding where and how inventory should move around relative to changing demand, volatility, as well as how consumers are shopping. Certainly can understand how those things have changed quite a bit over the last 18 months. If you look at some of the other examples, again, very specific to their environments, the jewelry retailer was being pressured to do same-day delivery, and one of the things they could do to get closer to their customers was eventually enable ship from store. And they had a roadmap to get there. Didn't happen overnight. They started with some simpler things into getting visibility of their inventory, picking up in store, call center functionality, and then shipping from store, which can certainly have a lot of impacts to people in store operations and other things. So I think the point here is that there are a lot of ways to get there. There is thoughtful steps in how you approach both the sequence as well as the capacity, the menu, if you will, that you're adopting.
You know, it's interesting, Michael, because while this phenomenon is accelerating, very quickly in retail, it's not something that is lost on manufacturers as well. We're starting to see manufacturers, because of changes in regulatory components, really adopting an e-commerce strategy. As an example, over the last year, we've been working with a set of manufacturers in the wine industry who have now, based upon the fact that, changing laws from the old prohibition times have changed, you don't have to go through a distributor. They can go directly to their own stores. They can go directly to the consumer, or they can actually go directly to the retailer, have changed their back-end supply chains significantly. They've changed their e-commerce strategy and now allow their customers to actually buy things online and have it shipped to their stores. And now we're actually working with drugstores who are now having 20-minute delivery of their products that they order online, things that used to be controlled substances, but now based upon relationships with now regulated vendors, they can actually put it in an Uber car in a controlled carrier and have it shipped to the end customer right away. All of those dynamics are changing because of the demands of the global pandemic and the needs of the customers to get the products where they are when they need them. Okay, sorry about that. I just lost my screen and I'm back. Okay, so one of the things that we mentioned before is, what are some of the capabilities that we need to take into account? One of the key strategies was, because you are now planning across more channels and you need tighter collaboration, real-time integration between those different channels, real-time integration between design and planning and execution, we call it convergence, is important. And then utilizing AI and other technologies to be able to do that. Making sure that product especially your A products, the ones that are in complete demand, are at the right place in the right at the right time for your customers is paramount. Service level is going to drive all things. However, you do need to make sure that you have integrated landed cost models to allow you to and enable your company to make sure that when you do that segment analysis, that the high profitability products are in the right place and that you're not losing money because of the convenience that you're providing. Dynamic forecasting, being able to forecast using point of sale, demand sensing, and so on are key capabilities that, again, retailers, distributors, and manufacturers alike need to be able to leverage today. And then being able to do adaptive inventory and sourcing strategies where I'm moving my inventory around to be in the place where I can serve my needs the best are going to be critical. And then more importantly, having an idea based upon the impact of what's happening in your supply chain, of the capacity and production needs that you have moving forward are also equally as critical. Moving along, from a global visibility perspective, it's important that, we've been talking for many years now about the digital twin and control towers, but it's more important than ever to now know and be able to do track and trace of your products from origin to destination, knowing where they are, and in return, if they go back, if you have refurbishments and things like that, you need to be able to track that and net that against your forward supply chains. There's this notion of the complete order. We talked about when the customer orders the hat, the jersey, and the shoes. Do they get them in one really nice box with, a bow on top, or do they get them as separate orders? And how do you ensure that you fulfilled all of those at the same time? And then how do you collaborate across different supply chains to make sure that you're getting the real-time information that you need to actually do the data analysis and so on that's required? And then how do you remain resilient in an industry where, there's a lot of constrained supply, whether it's in the auto industry with the chips or other industries where it's important to make sure that you're using green supply chain elements.
Yeah, George, just a quick little example that we ran into from a control tower perspective. One of the things that everybody is facing right now is limited capacity issues across the ocean. Containers hard to find, very, very expensive, right? So one of the key use cases that they're using their control tower for is to figure out, well, when I don't have enough containers, how do I decide what gets on the containers that I do have? And what POs, what inventory am I going to prioritize? And how do I make a good business decision off of that? What's the technology, the visibility that's required to do that accurately to impact ultimately the customer experience, right? That inventory finding its way here, ready for peak holiday season. Is it here or isn't it? And so a lot of what's happening, I'm sure a lot of you on the call today are feeling that in some part of your organization. So as we think about, another trend, and I'll be quick here because we want to get to your questions, is, obviously omnichannel and the approach that has been taken for the last, 5-7 years is still the case. Everything has moved quicker. And so now it's about taking that on organizationally and having truly a customer-centric view of omnichannel and thus supply chain, and really reshaping your supply chain to account for those expectations. You mentioned sustainability and ESG targets, seamless experiences across physical and digital channels, habits that have been picked up and now adopted in full as part of the pandemic. And then, what are the new things coming, right? Are we going to see drone deliveries, different types of delivery options that are meeting consumers where they are in more efficient ways? When we talk about flexible fulfillment, and we could talk for days about this. I will not talk for days. I will say that what we know is that the capacity of distribution domestically and really across the globe is not built right now for the mix that we have in terms of e-commerce, which are very different ways of fulfillment than traditional sort of retail, wholesale types of orders. The orders are smaller. They require broken packs. And so you see a lot of initiatives inside the four walls focused on shared inventory, selling the same SKU across channels, micro-fulfillment, bringing that inventory closer to population centers in a very targeted way. How do I know what SKUs to move to a dark store so that I can get to that same day delivery? What types of delivery mechanisms can I engage with? Uber, community pickups, return options. And then what are we doing to leverage the data that we're capturing from a fulfillment perspective? How do we decide, as I get those orders for the day, how do I decide to most efficiently fulfill them across, again, hundreds of thousands of units from a particular organization? How do I do that most efficiently out of the distribution capacity that I have? And then from a last mile perspective, I'll hit this quickly, George. What we know is 3/4 of shoppers in a recent survey indicated that putting an estimated delivery date in the cart or near the cart product pages is going to help convert those orders. And so when we talk about how visibility and being able to give transparency to the supply chain back to the customer impacts bottom line, that's a very real example. And so we know that there's technology that underlies all of that. There's a lot there. We do want to get to your questions, so I'm gonna cut it there. That's everything that we've prepared for today. You guys can obviously contact us both here, right, through the Q&A, as well as on the web, LinkedIn, and all the places you would know to find us if you haven't already. Again, George Fowler runs our planning and omnichannel practice. My name is Michael Murison, and I lead the distribution and logistics practice.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Michael. And as you said, we do have several questions that have come in while you gentlemen were talking, and it's time to move on to the Q&A section. There's still time to get your questions to us as we talk through some of these. And before we begin that, I would like to mention that there are some extra resources available. You can see a couple snapshot QR codes on your screen that will take you to those resources as well as we have some additional information in the resources tab on your console. Now let's get on to the questions. We have a question here for George. It reads, how do environmental, social, and governance, ESG initiatives, play into a brand's omnichannel strategy and impact the capabilities that you need?
That's a great question. In fact, what we're finding in our interactions with the companies that we work with is that your carbon footprint, your adherence to social norms at this point, things like whether your company has a vaccine mandate actually matters to the consumer. We've been talking for many months now about cancel culture and the implications of that. And quite frankly, it does play into your e-commerce strategy. So making sure that not only you have the ability on the e-commerce side to share the data behind the scenes that talks about what your e-commerce strategy is in terms of your environmental impact, things that you're doing to mitigate your carbon footprint and things like that are very enticing to the end consumer. And just like, Michael was talking about, adding a available to promise date on your website is important. We actually foresee that at some point in time, adding your carbon impact for that particular order or the overall carbon impact for your company is going to be just as important to demonstrate how effective your company is at executing its supply chains. We see that just as important as putting a label on food products over the past couple of years.
Really interesting. I can see that happening in the future, having a carbon impact label there. Looking a little bit down our list here, we have another question for Michael. What is the most underappreciated element that companies fail to consider in their omnichannel strategy?
Well, I would say primarily the way I'd answer that is that it's going to change. And so as you start that journey and you get into maybe the baseline of how you're going to approach omnichannel, the technology platform that you're building, the capabilities that you have in mind and the adoption of those capabilities can change quite a bit as you go on. For instance, those that have started several years ago, well, they didn't know that we'd end up in a global pandemic. And so what I think is important here is that organizationally, we rally around, and we talked about it sort of permeating within the organization, whether it be the distribution centers having the flexibility to shift volume between channels, right? As e-commerce goes up, retail goes down. That's going to change and change for different reasons. It has sped up quite a bit over the last 18 months. We know that. And so I think looking at that as a blinking red use case, we know that as you start your journey, you have a good plan. That plan will change. And organizationally, do you have your hand on the pulse to be able to make those changes and pivot quickly to changing customer expectations?
Right. It's often said that the one constant is change, right? And we have a couple questions left here, but we're just going to circle around for this final one so we can stay on schedule. Looks like this one is for George again. George, what is the biggest lesson learned from the pandemic as it relates to an integrated supply chain strategy?
Great question. One of the things that we've learned is that a lot of the strategies that we had before were based upon minimizing cost. And fundamentally, companies were trying to get their products out to stores, and bulk was better, trying to minimize the number of orders that were going out, getting them into inventory and getting them in place for, either production on the front end or on the back end, consumer consumption. On the front end was most important. And what we found is resilience is probably the most important element that we've learned. Companies have had to diversify channels of getting raw materials. Capacity is constrained. I've worked with companies that have had factories go down and not been able to produce things that they needed to produce out of those factories. And so they've had to shift capacity to other places and be able to do that both in a profitable manner, but also to meet the demand that's in place, especially in the food and beverage industry where, you've got date sensitive inventory and so on. So, what I would fundamentally say is building a resilient supply chain that takes into account the analytics that are necessary to measure how successful you are at managing your products is paramount today.
Got it. And you guys are sharp. That was another concise answer. So we're going to fit in one more question from the audience here. And the last one here looks like it'll go to Michael. Michael, how would you suggest an organization get started on their omnichannel journey?
Yeah, so good question. I reiterate, one of them is to start. It's very important to start this journey. What I think is an easy thing to do as you're getting started is just do a quick peer analysis. If you look at sort of who your competitors are in your space, or even some that are adjacent, maybe don't do exactly what you do, but maybe are think about strong brands. Most of the time, the brands that folks relate to, and those that are notoriously good at retaining customers, have a look at what they do and how they do it. The good news is that it's actually pretty easy to figure out, because you can, by definition, a lot of these things are customer facing now. And George, from one of the title slides, supply chain is your customer experience. And so with your peers, a lot of the time you can see what they do. without knowing really much about the inside of their organization. And so that's a really good place to start. I would take a look at that retail technology platform slide from this deck and that menu that we shared with all the key functions and how we orchestrate those different capabilities, and do a quick scorecard from an organization's internal perspective and say, where are we relative to what we know it takes to do this? That's not everything, but it will give you an idea of kind of what the lift is in front of you. And I just cannot emphasize enough to go ahead and get started. I mean, one of the retailers that was on the slide who started their journey, the very first thing that they rolled out for buy online, ship to store, they estimated, I think, roughly 3 to 5% of all e-commerce orders would end up being picked up in the store. Very, very quickly, they were up in the 12 to 15% range. And so they got that totally wrong. There's no doubt about that, in a good way. But they had to move quickly and adapt to that. And they had to think about, what is my customer saying to me, and how is she shopping? What does that mean to her experience? And then, sort of what's next? And so they used that first data marker to then engage further with their customers. And they took the next step and the next step and the next step. And so I think that should illustrate to us all really that we can analyze as much as we want, and piloting programs and really understanding how consumers are reacting to those things is really, really powerful.
And Ben, if I could add one more element to that, and this might be a shameless plug, but call us. This is what we do. We help companies go through assessments to determine where they are on that spectrum. We assess both the front end e-commerce capabilities that they have, as well as the back end capabilities from a planning perspective to be able to institute these without being too disruptive to their overall supply chains. And then there's always the change management component. This is going to fundamentally change the way your business operates, and we can support them in understanding those capabilities as well. So it's what we love to do. It's what we have a passion for. And, hopefully people have gotten something out of the presentation, but we'd love to work with different companies. And you can see we have a plethora of companies that we've already worked with to help be successful in this environment. So, maybe that's another place to start as well.
Absolutely. Really, really interesting conversation here, you guys. I love the concept that some mistakes are good problems to have, and always listen to the customer, and also talk to some experts for some help there. So that's near the end of our presentation here today. Shortly after the live event, we will send you an email reminder to access this presentation on demand, so you can view it once more, or you could share it with a colleague. Thank you again to our presenters, George and Michael, for a very informative session. And again, we encourage you to find more information about our topics today by going to that resources tab. And thank you all, of course, for sharing your own time today. We know that your time is valuable, and we hope that you walked away with some good ideas to help you better manage your supply chains. So for all of us at DC Velocity, I'm Ben Ames, and have a great day.